Hello, everyone. Welcome to Keith Chats, our random, organized, and serial that talks to people doing things in artificial intelligence. And today we have an excellent guest. His name is Chris North, and coincidentally, the company that he works for is 43 North GIS. And he says he uses passion to help people get the most out of their investment in GIS. But oh, there's so much more than that. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Keith. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. I so enjoyed your presentation that you did for Go Open Data's conference back in May. And what inspired me was you're talking about AI in an interesting fashion in terms of hype and
Hmm.
worry and things like that. Before we get into that, though, I want to find out how I don't want to say you transitioned because you're still working in GIS, but obviously your presentation was really AI oriented. So how
Hmm.
did you get there and what made you want to do presentations like that?
Hard, yeah, I have sort of stumbled into this world of generative AI. There's a lot going on in the GIS space that is has AI as part of it, or has a relation to AI. In fact, people have started to coin the term geo AI, and what does that mean? So there's a whole That's the thing. AI is such a broad term. What does it actually mean? What are we talking about here? That presentation I was doing was I was trying to be kind of specific, talk about the role that generative AI could play in the context of open data, right? And open data is kind of affiliated with or synonymous with GIS because a lot, not all, but a lot of open data that organizations provide is spatial in nature, especially in the municipal space, which is where I live most of my time. So I all those things got stirred together. And when I was talking to Yuri Konga about giving a talk at the event, that's kind of where the genesis came from. Like, where is it? Like there's all kinds of stuff in the GIS geospatial realm that uses AI and image classification and detection of features on the ground and all the really interesting stuff and all the data analytics. But the part I'm interested in is the role that GIS could play in helping us leverage the power of geography. Right? I think there's I, I'm open data has always been something I've been interested in because by opening up spatial data, I think people see the power of looking at problems spatially. I call it looking at challenges through the lens of geography. And what can this tell me? And I'm really interested in the role that generative AI can play in helping us look at these challenges and these problems through the lens of geography. How can it remove some of the complexity in dealing with spatial data? How can it remove some of the necessity to learn the jargon before I can, benefit from the data? That's kind of what interests me and where I was kind of going with my talk.
Interesting, because back in the day when I was working open data, we always used mapping and GIS really as an example,
Hmm.
right? When so much could be done with maps. And it's interesting because we've come so far from those early days. I'm wondering if you've found that, let's say, the interest perhaps in that area has waned a little bit, especially within, let's say, cities and stuff. I mean, is it so entrenched now that they don't think of it as open data as much as, mapping?
Interesting. I think I, how do I answer this question without getting a lot of people ticked off at me? I think I definitely don't think that the interest in GIS has waned. I think that what has happened is the power of looking at things spatially is becoming less and less the domain, the exclusive domain of GIS. I think there's a lot of other areas like asset management, so as business examples, and looking at public health and looking at other things. And I think that there's a recognition gradually dawning that looking at those problems spatially um, can make the solutions far more effective and help us solve the problem far more quickly. I think the challenge that GIS people like myself face is that the the irony is the connection between that sort of spatial thinking and the power of a GIS system that a municipality already has. There's a disconnect there. They don't realize, because I think what's happened is that most GIS, and this is the part that'll upset some people, I think most GIS systems within municipalities have been drawn into operational things like asset management, asset inventories, um, parcel mapping, important but relatively simple things. And we've done a poor job of saying those foundational pieces are what you need to look at these problems spatially over here. That so what has waned, what has broken is that connection that's really what GIS is. You go to most organizations, and I find this when I'm talking to municipalities in my role as a consultant. They say, "Oh yeah, yeah, we love our GIS. Our GIS is very important. I know all the data I need is over there." But then they go over here and they start to solve the problem. So I like to describe it this way: is that GIS systems, and this is where I think I'm interested in the role that AI can play. GIS systems largely have become places where people go to get data, not use data, right? And they want to use the data over here in solving these problems. They don't really see that. So there's this fascinating disconnect that, oh, I know I need to use geographic data to solve this problem, but I don't see that I need a GIS to solve that problem. And for me, that disconnect just is makes me want to beat my head against the telephone pole because it drives me crazy that we've done such a poor job of selling these capabilities. Why isn't that? Why don't they see that as GIS? Why aren't GIS people at the table? There's probably 1,000 reasons, but it's interesting. So when I look at open data, I kind of see some of the same disconnect. People say, "Oh, yes, we open data is so important because of this benefit and this benefit and this benefit." And usually they look around the room and they say, when they're starting out and launching open data, and they say, "Well, who's got data we can use?" Well, the GIS group is the one that's kind of got all their data ready and it's all very well organized. So more often than not, open data portals start with spatial data. The locations of all of our flu shot clinics, the locations of all our fire hydrants, our parcels, our roads, because it's all ready to go. But they don't see open data necessarily as something that's inherently spatial, even though some of the non-spatial things like the PDF documents and these bylaws and all this other stuff, you know, that's the stuff that's late to the party and on open data. So maybe it's just that GIS people are just terrible salespeople when it comes to, selling their capabilities,
Yeah, it
Um,
could be. I think, in fact, a lot of the open data people are, not the best salespeople either. And I say that
yeah.
with respect and a little bit of humor into it because it is a complex kind of issue when you talk about data and what you can do with data. Even today, it's still sometimes very hard to explain to people what it is. And that's why mapping was so useful at the start because,
Mhm.
you need data points to identify spots on a map, and then you can do things with that data to, zoom in or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm wondering and you kind of touched on it, has AI made it more complex or better for, let's say, open data people, GIS people to talk about? Is there maybe even a little bit more interest when you tie AI into it?
The way I would answer that question is I would say I think AI has holds the promise of making access to open data far simpler, uh, making it far more accessible for people. And I alluded earlier when I mentioned about, sort of not needing to know the jargon. I'll come back to that. One of the things I have observed is that the fear and uncertainty and doubt and the lack of understanding about what we mean by AI, what we mean by generative AI, is adding, I think, an unnecessary layer of complexity, right? Um, and I think that there is a fear. I mean, you kind of saw that in some at the conference when we were sitting there. You kind of saw that with some. It's like, oh my gosh, if I turn on this AI thing, I'm either going to be out of a job or somebody's going to get sued or like and when you dig into that, you say, well, why do you think that way? You really don't have a good answer because it's just there's the Hollywood fear factor about AI that it's going to sort of start making decisions it shouldn't be making, right? And so rather than saying, okay, how do we prevent that from happening? There's this kind of, well, we shouldn't do it. And that I find adds a layer of complexity we really don't need. I think if we just sort of, and that was kind of the nature of what I was trying to get at in my talk was that, hold on a second. What if we, instead of thinking about AI as this sort of, all powerful, all omnipotent system that's going to make all these decisions for us, you know, let's think of AI, and I use the analogy of the wine the wine sommelier or the hotel concierge, right? Think of it as something that is trained on my data. It knows a lot about your data. It's indexed it, it's sliced it, it's diced it, it's created these, and I don't understand how these indexes work. I'm not really interested, but it gives me the ability to ask questions about your open data, about your system, about your data sets, and have that kind of natural language conversation with it. And that I think is the potential for AI, for generative AI. I've got to keep reminding myself to be specific here. That's the potential I see for generative AI to make open data far more accessible and far more usable, right? Because Yuri and I used to have these conversations all the time. I was actually, it's funny, in the early days of open data, I wasn't a huge, I wasn't a huge enthusiast for open data. And I'll tell you why. It wasn't that I had any great concerns about the data being out there. I fully believe data should be accessible. I wasn't enthusiastic because what I saw in the early days and what I still see to a large extent is, again, that idea of, well, the open data is the place where I go to get the data, right? So it was great. If I was looking for a CSV of, all the permits for a city, you know, these systems were great. If I was looking for a shape file of all of the park benches these things were great. But I always kind of said to myself, what is my dad going to do with a shape file, right? Like it's borderline. So it wasn't so much that it was open data, it was almost that it was useless data, right? It was just here you go, here's a dump. And I kept thinking to myself, that's not really what people want. People want to be able to go and say, how many park benches do we have in our city? How many park benches in our city are actually in parks? How many, like they want to, I got this sense that people wanted to just sort of ask questions. People were interested. They had a reason for asking a question, right? And it was sort of like saying, I want to know how many park benches there are in the city, or I want to know how many park benches are, or I want to know what the nearest picnic site is to my house. Here's all the picnic sites in the city, right? You sort it out, right? And it was, and then recently I've seen some advances and I've seen some things with AI that come along, and they allow us to ask those kind of questions to I don't want to say query the data because that also has a technical connotation, but I want to have a conversation with someone to try and understand what's available and can you solve my problem. And that's why I like the sommelier example, right? Yes, I can go get the LCBO app and I can see all the wines that are available to me. I can get a long list. I can sort it by price. I might even be able to filter out only the Italian wines if that's what I want, or only the Ontario wines if that's what I want. But what I really want is a recommendation for a wine because I'm serving a certain dish to my friends this evening, right? And to me, you go to a sommelier and you can ask that kind of question and they can make a recommendation. And I see that potential with generative AI as a companion to open data. So the concept of open data, making the data open, but now rather than just something to search and tell me all the wines that are available, tell me all the data sets that are available, I can say, I'm really interested in what there is to do this week in the city. And it'll give me some suggestions and it might ask me another question and it might, you know, in a generative way, in an iterative way, it might go through and help me resolve that with open data, as opposed to just saying, poof, here you go. Right. And that's what gets me interested and excited.
Well, there's so much to unpack there. What you said, in particular, moving into your actual presentation. Um, what I liked is you got into the hype cycle, which is Gartner research.
Yeah.
And also, you started about the worry aspect. And as trying to do AI literacy, it made me ponder, am I getting too intense around the worry? I end my sessions by saying, I've got this nice little clip about cats. It's kind of a thing where one cat knocks over something and all the rest of them are jumping, going crazy in the room except for one. And I talk about
Yeah.
not all of us can panic, you know. And I used to be the one who's panicking. Now I'm putting it on them to panic. But I'm thinking, ooh, maybe um, I'm a little off with that, and I have to sort of mitigate perhaps where I'm going with that. And I wanted to talk a bit about the hype cycle and a couple of things that I wrote down there. And I'm just trying to get our multi-speaker view back. This is acting up on me again. Gallery, there we go. Um, Actually, this, I don't think you said this, but it occurred to me when they're talking about how it's overhyped. You know, as a marketer communications guy, the old adage was, you underpromise and overdeliver.
Mm.
I think what we're talking about in the hype cycle is that AI actually, and the people who are presenting it, creating it, overpromises and underdelivers. Would you agree with that?
I
Uh,
do agree with that.
and you also talked about the SME, subject matter experts, which I guess is like the concierge and so on. But you really got into this idea of the cycle and how we sort of reach a plateau a bit and then we move down. And in particular, I've got the graphic here. You actually showed this one. I'll go back.
Yes. Yeah.
The bottom one,
Yeah.
the trough of disillusionment. And I remember saying to you, I think that's the story of my life. But about the hype cycle itself, I want you to tell a little bit about how you presented this in the workshop and your content there, because I think it was really important
Yeah.
for us who are teaching AI and those who are maybe are worried about it or not worried about it. Either way, right? How it's so easy to get caught up in the buzz, something new,
Yeah.
or in fact, the risks around it or the dangers around it. You might hear ChatGPT is released, and then there's article about it's having hallucinations and wanting you to divorce your wife so I
Yeah.
could marry, and so on. So yeah, perhaps you could get into that for me, and I can leave this up if you want it, or bring it back, or however you might like.
Sure. You can leave it up. And again, this isn't mine, right? This is the
Partner. Yeah.
Gardner hype cycle, and I've seen this applied to many technological applications and technology, new technologies as they sort of progress and introduced over time. I remember us talking about the Gartner hype cycle when it came to Web 2.0 and just about everything. But basically just to walk you through, there's the different phases of this is there's on the left hand side of the diagram as you move from left to right, there's the technology trigger. It's kind of interesting with AI because a lot of things that we call AI right now and that are talking about it right now, they're not actually new, right? But what's new is that all of a sudden they're becoming mainstream. And I think is what we're really talking about. So there's this trigger of generative AI hitting the mainstream, the launch of Copilot, the launch of ChatGPT. And right away and very quickly, there's the hype just shoots through the roof. And we get not only the inflated expectations about what it can do for me and how much money it's going to make me, but also I think you can apply this to the fear and the concern as well. As that at the same time, the fear peaks, the concern peaks, the worries about privacy and it taking over the world, all of these things sort of shoot up into this peak of inflated expectations. And then generally what we see is that we realize at this peak that this thing's not the utopia. It's not the holy grail. It's not going to solve all the problems. So everybody gets kind of bummed out, right? And they just sort of, yeah, and they slide down, right? And they become almost kind of disillusioned with it. And a lot of people are like, whatever, yeah. Here's another salesperson coming to talk to me about their newest, AI powered yada yada for what's going to save the world. But then what happens is gradually some things stick, right? And that's where we slow down a little bit here and we say, all right, well, what can this thing do? What is it good at? What is it not good at? What could I apply it to? And we begin to climb this slope of enlightenment where we get a little bit smarter and we have a better understanding of its capabilities. And eventually we arrive at, again, this plateau of productivity, whereas, okay, this is what this thing is good for. And so we start using it that way, we start refining it, we start getting better at it. And always, it's nowhere near what we thought it was going to be. It's nowhere near the peak of inflated expectations. Never is. And so I apply this to generative AI in the context of open data. Now, we had some discussion at the talk was, where are we on this? For me, where I think we're going to be and where I would like to see us become is that plateau of productivity is that open data sommelier or that open data concierge for our open data. That ability, forget I don't want it deciding whether or not I can have a permit to put a swimming pool in my backyard. No. I to me that's an inflated expectation of AI. But it would be nice if there was an assistant, a chat that would guide me through the process to fill out the application. Where do I find the application? Do I even have a hope of getting a swimming pool? Do I have enough room in my backyard? Okay, what do I need to know, right, to have a swimming pool in my backyard? That for me, I think, and I believe that that's where our productivity plateau for generative AI and in open data and a municipal information system is going to be. I think having it make decisions is an inflated expectation. So, you know, likewise, the fear of it making these decisions, I think, is inflated because I don't think it should be doing those things. So why are we worried about it? Why are we trying to do it? Right? Let's look what we know, generative AI, we know what it is good at. It's good at mimicking natural conversations. It's good at providing communications in many, many different languages. It's good at very quickly scanning all of the available data sets and giving me a summary, right? Those are the things it's good at. Let's use it for what it's good at. And that was kind of what I was getting at in my talk is, let's not focus on worrying about what it shouldn't do. Let's leverage what it can do, and put whatever guardrails we need to put around that so that we can be comfortable with this, and not, you know, you know, not have it make stuff up. And the way you'd have it not make stuff up is don't connect it to irrelevant or data sets that aren't germane. Curate the content that you train it on, right? You can't go to the sommelier and say, what's a good Italian red wine to serve with lamb? They can tell you, and then ask it, well, how do you cook the lamb? Because then you're going to get the hallucinations. Because the sommelier's going to say, well, I don't know, maybe I don't know. You fry it? I like, oh, okay, I fried it, right? And that's what everybody's afraid of, right?
Yeah.
So we're,
Yeah.
you know, put it in, I don't want to say put it in a box, but put it in a curated set of rules and then use it for what it's good at.
Yes, what I liked again about your presentation was just that. I think you really nailed where we need to go because too many teachers or presenters or AIers
Yeah.
want to emphasize the other side of that. And I like the agency side, which is no, we're consumers of AI and we have an opinion here.
Yep.
And all you said it, all I want to know is what wine I should have with lamb.
Yeah.
And why are you presenting me through algorithms now a whole bunch of stuff
Yeah.
on other things or even just lamb. Now you're over, all
Yeah.
I get the lamb bit, but you don't have to inundate me with,
Yeah.
and I do think this is probably a problem with the people who are making it. They're not testing it. They're not asking. They're not really looking at what an audience might want. So they put what they want,
Yeah.
what they think they want, because actual practice, I think, as users, it would probably be slightly different. And that, to me, I find is a problem with the industry itself.
Yes. It's always been it's a problem. It's a problem with the industry. It's a problem with, I mean, vendors are guilty of it. And hey, full disclosure, I worked for a GIS software vendor for 22 years, right? There's your job is to sell software and generate revenue. But even GIS users, look, Keith, we GIS professionals, we've been guilty of this for decades. What did we do early on when people really said, oh, we should get GIS, we should have a GIS viewer on our municipal website. So what did we do? We built these very complicated web things that we took all the data we could think of and we put it down the left-hand side and we put a whole bunch of tools across the top and we put in a map and we said, look, isn't that cool? In other words, GIS people built something that was really good for GIS people, right? But it was terrible for my dad. And in open data, we did the same damn thing. We built, we have a bunch of data nerds built a system that would chock a block with detailed metadata and searching by keywords and all the slicing and dicing. And what did they build? They built something that a data nerd would want. GIS people built something that a GIS person would want. Data nerds built something that a data nerd would want, right? And that's the kind of cycle we need to break. And I think maybe to your point, is one of the problems we've got is that now we've got AIers, love that. We got AI hype people. They're building things that are going to be that are fulfilling the fantasies of AI or AI nerds, right? And they're not building something. And what I'm saying is, let's use AI or use a map or use a data to do something that my dad wants to do. My dad wants to know whether or not he can put a swimming pool in his backyard. So we need to reframe the way we think. I've seen that so many times. We have trouble as professionals in any field, I think. Lawyers do the same thing, right? Why is it only lawyers can read legal documents, yet the people who are impacted by those legal documents, by paragraph two, they're so befuddled they don't know. Like, every profession does this, right? And we gotta stop, right? And anyways, now I'm definitely on the soapbox here. So
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned the dad test.
yeah,
It's something we talked about again in the beginnings of Open Data, and I can tell you an anecdote of early days of an app that the city put out. The city I was working for, City of Toronto. So this is years ago. It was one of their first attempts at it, and it was very complex. And I remember doing a presentation for a seniors group, and I was really excited by this. And I said, "Hey, let's demonstrate. Where would you want to go? And let's put in the address." Anyway, it was a 17-step process kind of thing. I kid you not. And I guess after the third step, the faces on the audience, and I realized, this just isn't going to work. It's not passing the dad test by any means. And
yeah,
I've never forgot that in terms of, again, of the philosophy we tried to bring then to open data and stuff is, yeah, let's sit back. Who are we trying to create this for? Because in some cases, if you've got a
yeah,
techie audience, fine. But otherwise, no, it just doesn't clear the brain. They couldn't get it. And let's face it, 17 steps was complex.
yeah. Exactly. Well, yeah. Go to any municipal website. Go to mytown.ca. I guarantee you, unless you know how the municipalities departments are organized, you're gonna be lost two levels down in their website, right? You know, oh, I just want to, can I build a swimming pool? Well, unless you know to go where the permitting office goes and like what they and in this municipality permitting is called this, and in this municipality it's over here. And they're not even that wouldn't be so bad if there was consistency in the way municipalities are organized, but there's not, right? So, it's like, oh, sometimes it's engineering, sometimes it's public work, sometimes it's this, and then they got so there's we because the municipal website, again, was built by municipal professionals who live in that structure. So that structure oozed out into the public facing website they created. The complexity of a GIS application with the toolbars and the layers and, you know, that oozes out into a public facing map viewer. And we that's where the wheels always come off. I remember showing again the dad test. I remember showing another anecdote. I remember showing my dad one of these early web GIS things we'd done, and I was so proud of it. We had all our layer. I guilty of it as charged. I had the layers and my dad asked me an innocent question. He's like, "Oh, this looks really neat. What is the checkbox beside rivers for?" And I said to him, "Oh, that's really cool. I can turn on and off the rivers." And my dad says, "Why the hell would I want to turn the rivers off on a map?" Right? Like it was to me, it was like, oh, because I can. But for him, it was like, well, that makes the map useless in his mind, right? It's just, we don't think, and that's, I guess, I mean, there is the whole user experience, and that's a whole discipline in and of itself. But we just don't apply that thinking to the systems we build. And, again, this is where I get excited. I see the potential of something like generative AI to be that, right? To just have it's just like the Star Trek computer, and this is what I want, right? And maybe we're tantalizingly close to that with generative AI. And that kind of gets me excited, right?
Yeah, two stories. I don't know why. Well, I do know why we're talking about seniors, because it's apropos sometimes just of not being used to something. You know, the way communication was before, it wasn't perhaps what they are thinking of. There was our nursing home group wanted to update their web pages, and I was working on the web at that time, so I had a lot of advice for them. I was also working with a colleague, which they didn't buy into, so we didn't win the argument, and they won an award. And it just slipped out my inner monologue. I just said, "Well, were you the only entry?" Because actually, back in high school, we did a film and it won an award, and we were the only entry, and it wasn't a great film. It was terrible, right? So that was cruel of me, but really, it didn't help our argument. And I think it's again they were being judged in this contest by other websites who were working in cities and so on. So they all looked a certain way, right? And I tie this in now with something like Gen AI. Um, quick short anecdote. Just before that was there was a program called Write Writer that my boss bought for me when I was working in the Scarborough Health Department. And prior to that, none of the stuff that was we were writing a newspaper column, and I used to edit it, and they never liked my edits until I started using Write Writer, because it did literacy checks and all kinds of things about more complicated words to less complicated, and they bought into that. So there was again a sort of a tech tool. Now with Gen AI, I'm thinking if you get just what you're saying, where it's summarizing and it's cutting to the chase, right, and it's very good, and people are going, oh, all right, I understand this. It may help the argument in a number of ways, from people working in cities to industry itself, because hey, I'll believe the AI. I don't believe you and what your expertise is, but I'll believe the AI.
Yeah, yeah,
And then we tie in some of the risks, though. If the AI is inaccurate for any reason, why there's still a need for me. I mean, I still have to
yeah,
validate this kind of thing, right?
yeah.
Um, so it's different times for sure. And age obviously is going to be a bit of a thing, but we're looking at generations now coming up, right? That are locked into their
Hmm.
phones and to the tools. And what is their working life going to be like, let alone with my job changes, perhaps, or even job losses? But it's going to be a different environment. And then I think of the CEOs and CIOs who are of a certain age who
Yeah.
may not want to buy into their climatization with it and their desire to use it. Because I think we're in a time period right now where a lot of the bosses aren't sure about it. Some are saying, don't use it.
Yeah.
Some are saying, use it. Go ahead. But I don't think they're using it, if you know what I mean. They're handing that off to staff to use. So, what is their knowledge around it, right? And what do they think about it?
Yeah.
And are they prepared to bring in policies that enable it, or what?
Yeah. Well, and that's this kind of the fear factor, right? Like it's it's natural. It's a natural human reaction to fear something that you don't understand, especially when it's hyped and especially when it's something that's I've only ever seen in Star Trek, and now you're telling me it's real? Like, come on. So what's next? You're going to beam me to my meetings, right? Like it's and I think that's where part of that teasing out is that, there's science fiction, there's science fantasy, and there's science, and it's often hard to tease out where one is actually, transitions to the other, right? And like it's so it's I do sense the resistance, and every organization I'm involved in, and when we start talking about this, there are concerns, and some are legitimate concerns, and some are, and I've seen, you know, heck, I've seen people, you forget AI for a moment. I've seen people do things with just cloud applications, software as a service applications where, ooh, I wish you hadn't done that. Like, oh, this is great. I can upload a spreadsheet and it geocodes it for me, and I can make a map and I can share it with everyone so I could show my coworkers. But that map was, at-risk individuals, or people in shelters, and like, oh boy, that was information you shouldn't have put. And then it wasn't AI. There was no AI there. It was just a fundamental. lack of understanding of how exposed things are and how things are shared and what you can and can't access in this new world. And if we're going to spend time, trying to put guidelines around something like AI, that's where I think we need to focus, not on the necessarily the AI itself, because the technology is going to do what people do with the technology. I think we need to educate people on, appropriate uses. And I said earlier, like when we on our journey up the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity, that journey, enlightenment isn't just an awareness of the capabilities, the what and the how. It's an awareness of the who and the why we use this technology. And there again, if you're to go back to the hype cycle, I always categorize things by, there's the what and how of technology and there's the who and the why, right? The hype is all about the what and how, right? Oh, it can do this and it can do this and it can do this. We get all excited. And if you're that guy sitting at the sales pitch, you say, well, like my dad say, well, why would I want to turn the rivers on and off? Well, if the answer is because you can, well, I think you need to go do some more homework, right? I think you need to say, no, that's a good question. Why would you want to turn the rivers on and off? Like why would I want to be doing a chat? Well, I just want to know if I can build a shed, right? I don't need all this data. I don't I, so many people they don't, and again, I don't want to get data, I want to use data. And I think we build professionals build systems to make it easy to get data, right? And we stumble when we want to make it so that people can use data. And we've never done a good job of that.
I think too, the why question is so important. I go back to consumers of AI. We should be asking the question, why?
Why?
I
Yeah.
don't want this. Why do you think I want this? So many people do get caught into the hype though, because, oh, it sounds like I got to get that new tool. I'll download it right away. I
Yeah.
found that with DeepSeek, a lot of the people who were complaining about Sidewalk Labs, our tech community in Toronto,
Hmm.
because why? Well, the data is going to be stored off country,
Yeah.
and they were up in arms and they said, this cannot stand. Uh, so fast forward now, years later, and DeepSeek comes out, and a lot of the people I know tell you, downloading it, just read their terms of agreement, and it's
Yeah.
quite clear where all the data goes and who has access to the data. And you would think that the same principle would apply, right? So sometimes the new tool is the thing, and it's hype, hype, hype.
Yeah.
But we do need people saying why. What worries me is the people inside the companies don't seem to be asking why. They're
No.
they're totally enjoying the process of, hey, we can do this,
Yeah.
but why?
Yeah. I don't look, we can't, and again, I was one for so long. We cannot rely on vendors for the why. Their job is the what and how. Their job is to build technology, right? I think, it's organizations like I was talking, we were talking to at the Open Data conference. Those are the people who need to figure out why, right? And why do we need this? Who is it for? Why do they need it? You know, it's, okay, again, the what, it's not the what can it do, it's the what problems are we trying to solve here, right? Because that fundamentally is a who and a why.
Would you think that's where government can come in? And the word regulation seems to be a troublesome word for those who create. And I guess it sounds like bureaucracy, right? We're going to have to do this and like 18
Yeah,
steps and so on. But if you, I think, make an analogy to like airplane travel, right? There's a lot of simple things that you need to do. You walk around the plane, you look at the tires and so on. I mean, that's regulation, but it's logical, right?
yeah,
And the questions that you're asking, I think, are logical regulation type questions. Why do you want to do this? What happens if it goes wrong? What are
yeah,
your mitigation strategies? That doesn't sound overly burdensome to me. But
no.
I'm wondering why the innovators feel it's going to cut back on innovation and it's going to destroy what we want to do.
Yeah, I don't know because you're right because safety checks, pilots walking on an airplane hasn't really slowed the airline industry down at all, right? Like it's you know, you look at that example, it's totally logical. I don't think I certainly don't think that a healthy conversation about I mean these are guidelines. Maybe they are regulations, rules, whatever, you know. Um, I think they're critically important. I don't know that government left to its own devices understands the technology. I don't think they understand the who and the why enough on their own to create those regulations. I don't think the Transportation Safety Board, yes, they probably have a robust list of what a pilot's pre-flight check entails. I'm no expert, but I'm going to guess it wasn't government employees at Transportation Safety Board that came up with that list. It was pilots, right? And I think we need to say, I think as open data practitioners, I think as GIS professionals, we should, look internally and ask those why questions and do that, and then say, okay, here are the things that we think, here are the guardrails we think should be up there, and here's what we think should be up there. And then I think government's role is to then codify and enforce those somehow, right? But the government can't come up with it on its own. They don't have the domain expertise any more than people at the TSB fly planes, right? But it's so that's what we need, and that's why I think we need some industry advocacy. And there, I I'm dangerously close to a real detour here, Keith. So tell me if we get. Uh, Um, the GIS industry really needs a strong advocacy group because it's it doesn't really exist. There are associations that are very good at promoting the use of GIS software, and creating organizations to help everybody get up and running, and it's like the open data, the group, like that conference is great. It brings people together. But out of that, out of groups like that, what we need is not just, it's one thing for those groups to say, well, we need regulations. Yes, we do. What are they? Right? I think we need to look around the room and realize, oh, we're the ones that need to come up with that. And I don't think we're doing that. I know we're not doing that in GIS. I know we're not doing that in open data, and I don't like it's just, you've got something here that's going to be part of your realm. What are what should we think about? What do we need to think about? And we don't, unfortunately, again, tend to do that. And that maybe that's that sort of groupthink, and that's why our GIS viewers look like GIS viewers instead of looking like useful tools, right? Like there's this kind of groupthink, and I think it's a cop out to say, well, government's gonna have to regulate this, right? Okay, what do you want them to regulate, right? Well, the AI stuff. Okay, so if you give them a vague, set of criteria like that, what you're going to get back is a very broad, thou shalt not use it, right? It's like it's almost like you mentioned earlier, the where data was located. We just sort of said, oh, data can't leave the country, right? Okay, so what did government do? Well, they put a very broad, set of rules that says data can't leave the country. But then when you dig into it and you say, well, what does that mean? Well, it has to be stored in Canada. Okay. Do you know how the internet works, right? So when you're using that data, right, like it's streaming back and forth between your browser and the server. Yeah. Do you know the path that it takes probably went through Chicago, down to LA, up to Vancouver, over to Calgary, down like it's
Yeah.
so like we just if we're not specific and we don't think about that path to the plateau of productivity, and we just sort of knee-jerk reaction, you're going to get it. Well, then you can't do it, right?
And I
Um,
think that is the fear of the industry. You're going to say, well,
yeah, And that's why industry and the people who are, that's why they get really nervous because they know, that now all of a sudden that investment I've made in this thing, I won't be able to sell it to anybody, or I'll have to call it something else, right?
We won't get grant money.
And it won't get grant money. Yeah. So it's just like, well, hold on a second. Why don't we just figure out why we need this thing, right? Who needs it and why, and solve all that, and then so
I think
maybe start with the regulations first, right? And just or the need for regulations. I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is let's say the government lawmakers or the committees they set up don't have representation, so they are speculating or running on something they heard, perhaps from a consultant, perhaps not, right? So to me, what we're talking about really is getting a number of things engaged here: the maker, the regulator, and the
Yeah.
user. And
Yes.
working at that, it's not as easy as three people getting together who are at a level of government that can make that, and they decide to make it.
Yeah.
No, it just won't work.
Yeah.
And I think what I was trying to get out of the conference too, to the open data people still in it, was to advocate for yourselves because you do have a certain expertise that isn't often consulted. Now, I'm not sure if that's true of GIS though, because again, I think you folks had a really good place already. You were respected in a sense, or would you agree with me that you had the respect and people turned to maps and they understood to some degree, here are the guys that provide that stuff and it's useful?
I think so. And I think that, I sort of said this, one of the first things I said in our call this morning here, just so to the risk of repeating myself. Absolutely. I go talk to the engineering department or the parks department or the planning department at any municipality. Uh, 9 times out of 10, the GIS folks are great. Their stuff is good. It works really good, but they're foundationally, I think GIS is very good. Um, the GIS industry, and remember what I said earlier that all of this stuff, GIS now is seen now as the place where the spatial data is created and managed and stored and retrieved. And we're going to use that data over here when we do our planning and when we do our public health analysis or where we decide to put our vaccine clinics, right? But there isn't what I think the GIS industry has done a terrible job at is advocating for the fact that it is the GIS isn't just the fuel for that engine of decision making. It is the engine of decision making. It should be the thing you use to make that decision. And I think the GIS industry has not advocated that last step, right? There's almost a laziness, and I know that'll upset some people. There's a laziness in GIS people that, well, I assembled all the data and I've kept it up to date. What more do you want? Right? And what more I want is you to start using that data to solve these problems, right? But there's that well, not my job attitude, I think. And I rail against this in the GIS space all the time, where we are abdicating our role as geographic thinkers and assuming that just because we have spatially enabled the data, that the others that use it will leverage it in a spatially responsible and a spatially cognizant way. And there's no guarantee of that unless you bring your training. So we've created a generation of GIS professionals that don't see themselves as geographers, but see them as DBAs. And I want the GIS industry to start seeing itself as geographers again. And that's been lost, right, over the past 15, 20 years. That geographic thinking is just lost, right?
Yeah, it sounds like you get to the table, but you leave the table too early.
Exactly. Well, you get to the table and say, there, I put a lat long on everything. What more do you want? Right? You haven't promoted looking at the problem spatially. You're just assuming that because there's spatial data there. And yet, these GIS powered open data sites, what's one of the things they allow you to do? Download the data as a CSV. What does a CSV do? It strips off all the geography, right? It's just like, okay, all you've done is put it back into a table, right? How come they're not using maps? Well, because, anyways, I digress.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting to discuss this, and I kind of find too often when you're doing, let's say, conferences or even this video, it's going to be hard to get the mayor, to watch this or stay. Often they'll come in and do the greeting, the mayor, hey, welcome, and then they leave,
Yeah.
and that to me is a difficult thing. And I know the offices are busy for sure. But one of the things that struck me back in the day, again, when I was working as the city manager, was having a meeting with us and talked about not understanding social media. I leave that to my kid. My social media understands it, the Twitter stuff. Like I don't. And I thought, you're in a very high profile position in the city. And do you really want to say in front of an audience you don't understand it and pass it off to a 14-year-old? Partly the problem is, again, is they're not attending those kinds of things. I don't know whether you reach a certain level and you figure I don't need that kind of education anymore. It's the whole lifelong learning argument. And in some of these areas in particular, when it comes to data and what we do with data, what's our position on sharing data, um, they started preaching the mantra of transparency and so on, but I haven't seen it in practice by a lot of governments where there's still a lot of things that they won't release, right? For
Hmm.
reasons that are other than um, what you might get out of the data, right? There's reasons why it may show something and they don't want it to be shown and stuff. So we've got to
Yeah.
get them over that hump and recognize that trust, which is suffering so badly, is going to be enabled by transparency and the use of the governments of things like AI and data mapping and so on in a responsible way, but in a way that invites participation. Back to the dad argument, right? Does this fly with these audiences? And if so, great. If not, why not? And how can we enable it so that it's working for everybody? That seems to be missed by a lot of politicians because they're not fighting that good fight that way. They're getting elected through other things.
Yes.
And all of the issues, I mean, you've talked about how mapping can help answer homelessness or traffic. All of that can be enabled if it's understood and better presented. And I'm not sure why politicians aren't attaching AI to that as
Yeah.
a means to get elected. Look, I'm hip. I understand where AI is going and why we need to do this. So vote for me because I'm the only one talking about it.
Yeah. It, it's interesting because you know there's again I think it's that fear and that the concern, you know a story along these lines when COVID hit. I was still working for Esri at the time, and it I sort of headed up the team that started promoting the use of mapping, case counts, all that, presenting it spatially, looking at this thing through the lens of geography. And I was shocked at the resistance to looking at everything spatially. No one was afraid of uh, watching case count numbers tick up and up and up and up. But the moment we started to map where cases were happening with any level of precision, even like I'm not even talking getting down to people's individual addresses and whatnot. I'm talking about by postal code, by FSA, by municipality. All of a sudden, people were so worried about stigma and so worried about privacy, and it really surprised me. I mean, yeah, I guess I get I don't want to put in, you know, a dot on somebody's house where they because they've got COVID. I get that. But boy, there's got to be I kept advocating for some level of geographic context that would allow us to understand why we're getting more cases in certain areas versus others, right? Like, what is it about these areas? We're seeing to just say, oh, we have tens of thousands of cases in Canada today. So what, right? Even by province, it was kind of a so what, right? But when you got down to, gee, we're getting more cases in this area of the city than we are in this area of the city. Why is that? Um, what's going on there? It's a virus. It doesn't, you know, there's got to be something about that. Well, is it socioeconomic factors? Is it size of households? Is it, and there were a lot of factors. There were a lot of areas with people who could stay at home and work and isolate themselves. But in other areas, most people worked in services, and they had to go into the grocery stores and they had to go, and lo and behold, or they were like, it was to understand those factors that there's incredible value in understanding those factors, right? But there's a reluctance to use that kind of power to look at that problem through the lens of geography. And I think it's the same way. I think there's a reluctance to look at the power of generative AI through the lens of what it can actually do because we're worried about the taking over the world and stuff. So we've got to sort of get to that trust, right? So, because, you know, not my quote, I forget who said it, but innovation moves at the speed of trust, right? And that's your speed limiter, right? So how do we build that trust? So for me, it's showing those mayors the power of geography. That's what, that's my life now is I don't want to turn you into a GIS nerd, but I do want to turn you into a geographer. I want to turn everybody into geographers because I think every single crisis that we face right now, turn on the news and what everything from economics to war to terrorism, they're all rooted in geography. They're all rooted in geography. Environmental impacts, the climate change, the housing crisis. These are all things that are rooted, maybe not exclusively in geography, but they all have a major root cluster in geography. So if you don't look at those problems through the lens of geography, as well as the lens of economics, as well as the lens of sociology, as well as the lens of history, then you're not seeing the whole picture. And if you don't see the whole picture, you're not going to solve the problem. You're just going to keep going on and on and on.
It's interesting because I'm thinking of, the tools. So what are the tools of the mayor and council? It doesn't seem that they're using these tools. There are other things that they may be using, but they should be actually using the tools as part of their job.
Yep.
And in some cases, may be too complex, but they've got staff that can help provide insights. But they need to ask for those insights, or staff needs to push forward and say, look, we've got these insights, right? I mean, a musician uses their instrument, uses the technology to record their stuff. They don't not use that or not turn to it, right? Maybe they
Yeah.
busk on the street, but they're not going very far. So, yeah, there's something there, I think, in individuals who reach certain levels or the politician who reaches certain levels. They don't want to be necessarily having to learn something or appear that they don't know something. So they make assumptions. And those assumptions could be way off. And if staff aren't really prepared to jump in or they're afraid to, which happens, then you've got a false premise and you do things that perhaps aren't the most efficient way to resolve things.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
that seems to be reality. Not
Yep.
every mayor is like that, but a lot of them are. Not every, prime minister or premier is like that, but a lot of them are.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
yeah, you got to I guess it's back to this idea of, what's going on? What are the tools? How can I use those tools rather than necessarily assigning those tools? I'd be interested as a thesis, how many of the people in the authority positions are actually using ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah.
Or are they relying on their staff to use it, expecting their staff to use it?
Yeah.
Because truthfully, at some point, they may be able to use it themselves and not have a huge amount of staff, right? They should just use it themselves, and it writes their own copy, and it writes their speech, and it writes their advertising, and there you go. That may
Yep.
not be the way we want to go, but the fact is, if they're familiar with the tools, they might realize, well, I don't really want that as part of my company. It's not how
Yeah.
I want to live with the company. I still want people.
Yep.
Uh, it is a bit of a mess, isn't it?
It's a mess right now. I think I'm a technology optimist, always have been. We'll sort this out. We will get to that plateau of productivity. I certainly have a vision for what it looks like when it comes to generative AI for, open data, for spatial, for GIS, for geography. Um, as I said during the talk, I think we're still moving along the hype cycle with generative AI. It was interesting that everybody thought we were very different places, and I think that reflects largely where you come from.
Yes.
But I think we will get there, and I think the end of the day, the the potential benefits far for me far outweigh the risks. That isn't to say that we can ignore the risks. You never ignore risks, but I do think the benefits are such that we need to address the risks because the benefits are there.
One of the things I believe you mentioned was the dimming of critical thinking. I'm just looking at my notes again, and how that's another risk factor if we.
Yes, oh, absolutely. Because because Chat GPT says it's so. You know, I think that is a risk, and there's different ways to mitigate it. I think there's technical ways to mitigate it, and that's back to curating what your AI learns from, what you feed it, right? If you feed an athlete good, healthy food, you'll get a high performing athlete. If you feed them crap, they won't perform. An AI is no different. If you feed it crap, it's going to perform crap. Garbage in, garbage out. That has always been the case. Um, Also, I think you instill critical thinking is a it's a more importantly, it's a human function, right? If we show people how to use these tools rather than just throwing them out there like like opening up Copilot or Chat GPT, and let them play. Let them play. I'm not saying we don't let them play, but while we're playing, let's think about the guidelines. Let's think about how we use this. Let's question what we get. Let's compare it, right? Let's do a simple experiment. Ask a Chat GPT the same question twice on two different sessions. You'll get very different answers, right? If you same with a human being, right? If you ask a person a question, right, you'll get an answer. If you then ask that same person the next day the same question, they might look at you like you already asked me that. But they're identical. Their answer's not. It's going to be similar, but not identical, right? So recognizing that, and then you as the intelligent being here, synthesizing what you got and saying, does it make sense? Right? You know, we could have a whole hour long podcast on, bubble thinking right now and echo chamber
Yeah.
thinking. Let's not get started there, but
Well, I'm mindful of your time, and we probably
yeah,
should
we
wrap it
don't,
up.
yeah, we
Um,
don't tend to do that, right? We don't, yeah.
how did that happen? I got a thumbs down. I don't want thumbs down. I want
Oh, yeah, I think
yeah,
that's
AI.
the gestures. I don't know. Is it a
Yeah.
mine? Yeah, I
Oh
don't know.
dear. Okay. Well, no, no.
Thumbs up. I got
Yeah.
thumbs up. Thumbs up. No, no, yeah.
Elbows up for us Canadians, right?
Yeah.
It was great talking to you, Chris. I hope we can
Thank
continue
you.
another one, and we'll ask the same questions and see if your answers are different.
Okay.
But yeah, I really enjoyed your session. I've enjoyed our chat today, and carry on the good work because I think it's important and I think it resonates. So my opinion on what to do.
Uh,
And, it's been a
Appreciate it.
pleasure
Thank
talking to
you.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed this, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, let's get to that. Let's get to that productivity plateau as soon as we can.
That's right. And I'll start looking at my maps as a geographer.
Look at everything through the lens of geography.
Geography. I like it. Sounds good. All right.
All right.
Take care,
Thank you,
sir.
Keith.
We'll talk
We
again.
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And now, just some publicity for myself here. This is where you can reach me. If I get a like, if you like what you're hearing, like us, follow, subscribe. There's some places you can find me. LinkedIn.com/company. Literacy AI is the company page. /in/McDonald is the LinkedIn page. And Literacy AI TV is the YouTube channel. If that went too fast, you can go to the website, literacyai.com, and find out all you need there. Thanks for watching, folks.